This is All Grit.
Hosted by Animesh and Tanya. We are excited to bring you the third episode of All Grit. We foray into the world of marketing, and our guest today comes from a gamut of experience in this field. We are in conversation with Vivek Khandelwal, who is a graduate of ISB, has held senior marketing positions in Groupon, Amex, and is currently with Autodesk as the head of digital marketing and strategy of the Asia Pacific region. We discuss the changing trends in marketing communications while getting to know more about his interesting career path.
Hey Vivek, welcome to the podcast. We are really excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Finally, you got the time to join us from Singapore.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Singapore is still fine, right? Try doing a webinar with somebody in the US. Then you'll realize how difficult time zones can be.
Yeah, so how are things in Singapore right now?
Things are definitely better. I think the government was quite proactive in ramping up all of the testing and different preventive measures. So it's definitely improved from what it was, let's say, a couple of months back.
That's good to hear. So talking of Singapore, we understand that you went to SMU for your undergrad and then eventually to Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. That sounds like a very exciting journey, and we would definitely like to hear you talk about it a little bit more and talk about your journey so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was in high school, I had an aspiration to go study abroad, right? And, Singapore was a very obvious choice for various reasons. Firstly, it was close to home. From an Asia context, a lot of multinational companies tend to have the regional headquarters in Singapore as well. And it's really a melting pot of cultures, right? So very international place, great place to live in. So that's when I applied to SMU, and there was a new course that the university was starting around information systems, which sounded very exciting, merging business and IT. So, decided to take up that course within SMU. Right. After my graduation from SMU, I did my own venture. So, that venture was around education and training. Did that for a couple of years. After which, I had to wind down the venture. And that's when I started asking myself, right, what is it that I want to do next, from here? And at that point, I, kind of realized that I would love to go back into the corporate world, right? Before going into the corporate world, I thought it would be important to sort of complement my experience in the venture with some management tools and techniques as well, right? So MBA was definitely something that was on the cards. Of course, MBA gives you a pretty strong head start in terms of the role and company, right, as well. So that's when I started looking at different business schools. And ISB fit the bill on many different criteria, right? The peer group of ISB has great work experience. They come from a very diverse set of industries. Through its affiliation to the top business schools in the world, the education is fairly international as well, right? So it seemed to be like the right fit for me, for my MBA pretty much.
Since you mentioned your startup, separations are usually very difficult. Now, we understand that leaving a startup and joining a business school must have been a very difficult decision. What were the challenges while leaving your baby like that?
Yeah, so look, my startup was around a partnership with a very popular training company in Europe, right? And when you're doing business with a company abroad, it's very difficult to predict if working styles, working expectations are going to match or not, right? I mean, in hindsight, I would have loved to do a little bit more due diligence in that space. But again, this venture was something I was starting right out of college. I was fresh out of college. I was doing this completely on my own. So, there were some challenges in that space. I think the other key thing that's worth highlighting is that my risk appetite started to decline a year into the startup, right? So you see your peer groups around you who are in comfortable corporate jobs, they're getting a stable income. And then as an entrepreneur, you always ask yourself, right, is this the right thing, right? Whatever you're doing, is this something that you really want to do? What's going to happen 1 or 2 years down the line? So I think, those were the couple of reasons why I eventually winded up my startup. But my advice, to all of the listeners of this would be, when starting a new company, right, you've got to think long term. I think, thinking short term is not going to do you justice, right? If you're in this to make profit in the first year, that's not going to happen. You have to have a time frame of at least something like 3 to 5 years when starting your own company, right? So that is, learning for myself as well, right? I mean, I was probably a little bit short term in my approach as a fairly young entrepreneur. And I think what kept me motivated, right, during this difficult time was my desire to sort of start fresh, right, into the corporate world, get into industry as well as a function which I'm truly passionate about, and start my career again, in the corporate arena. So that was what really got me motivated during that time.
That's really interesting. You said that you grew risk aversive and that's why you wanted to kind of start afresh. But what I noticed in your career trajectory is that you started, your undergrad was in finance and information systems, right? And then you moved to marketing from thereafter, after your days in ISB. So, I mean, that must have taken courage because you're completely changing your industry. So what influenced this shift, and how difficult and easy was it for you to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I often get asked that question, right? So this is not a new question at all.
I'm sure.
Now, during when you're starting a company, right, when you're an entrepreneur, you end up becoming a jack of all. I remember my startup days when I was running my venture. I was doing sales in the morning, marketing in the afternoon, accounting in the evening. So you get a flavor of many different disciplines, and then you really start asking yourself, right, what is your true passion? And there's no better way to find out than by actually experiencing it in the real world environment, right? As opposed to, let's say, reading about these things, in books. So that's when I figured, marketing is really my calling. That's what I'm truly passionate about. And I wanted to make that career switch basis that experience, right? Now, making the switch is not easy, like you said. It does take a lot of courage. But I think if you've got the right game plan, you are able to do it, right? And for me, the game plan was, number one, do an MBA in marketing. So that gives me a pretty strong educational qualification in that space. It allows me to understand the discipline in much more detail. But at the same time, also to do as many projects as I can in the marketing world, while at university, try to do more case studies, try to take up some projects in that space. While I was at ISB, I took an experiential learning program, which is a sort of a real life project that you do for a client, right? Which was also in the marketing space. So all of that allowed me to really build up my profile and differentiate myself, right, from somebody who was, not really totally averse with marketing. So I think that was what got things going for me. I think it's very important that you build a game plan around how you're going to make that switch. It's not easy, but if you do it right, it can be done.
So I actually want you to talk a little bit more about that, because we are currently enrolled in a 1-year MBA as well. So I assume, and you were talking about it, that it's not easy to make a shift of domain, especially in a 1-year MBA. So what kind of hard work, and I mean, you spoke about it a little bit, but if you could elaborate on what kind of work goes into making a shift if you're looking to make it in a 1-year program like you did and like we are enrolled in.
What is that extra which you had to give?
Absolutely. So, I think one of the advantages of attending a business school is that your peer group come from a very wide range of backgrounds, right? So it is extremely critical that you take full advantage of that. You speak to people who have come from a marketing background and understand from them, what are the skill sets needed? What is it that, companies are actually looking for when they actually assess the various candidates? So I think that gave me a real perspective on, what are the areas I really need to focus on. And basis that, then I started reading up more on specific areas. I started taking some, site certifications as well. For example, I remember that during my MBA, I took an entire certification on Google search, right? To get myself ready when the time is right and when placements begin. So I think that part is also very, very critical, and really being on top of your marketing courses, right? Because you know that this is something that you're here for, that's the switch you're going to make. So making sure that you're avid about those courses, having conversation with professors and students, all of that really comes together to allow you to make the switch.
Now, when you finally got into marketing, we noticed that you got into many American multinational companies as a head of the APAC region, Asia Pacific. Now, what kind of challenges did you face in these regions? Because in Asia Pacific is culturally very diverse. When it comes to culture, demographic, spending powers, there are many data sets for a marketeer to look at. So there are two questions here. Which was the most difficult region to market for, and what was the biggest challenge which comes when you are going across regions with the same product?
Yeah, so Animesh, like you rightly pointed out, right, APAC is a very heterogeneous region. Every country has its own marketing landscape, own marketing platforms. And as an APAC marketer, somebody who has a regional remit, it can be a very complex ecosystem, right? So I think if I were to think about which market is probably the most challenging, right, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the APAC marketers would have a similar answer, it has to be China, right? So China has its own parallel world when it comes to digital platforms where you find good user engagement and reach, right? Let's take social media, for example. Typically, across APAC, Facebook and Instagram, that tends to
Yeah.
work pretty well. They've got a good
Yeah.
amount of reach, they've got a good amount of customer base on them, right? But there's hardly any Facebook footprint in China, right? Instead, they've got platforms like WeChat, which is sort of a combination of WhatsApp and Facebook, and Zihu, which is a online community, which is where you need to advertise from a social media standpoint. Right now, with each of these platforms, you have to go through an entire learning curve. They have their own idiosyncrasies, which you need to understand in order to market there, right? So for somebody who's handling 10 markets, to go through such a steep learning curve for one market is quite a bit of overhead. But then, the size of the China market makes it worth it, right? Similar things can be said about the search marketing, where there's no Google search marketing in China. Instead, there's a platform called Baidu, which is very dominant, right? So it's a complex ecosystem out there. You learn as you go. But I think in order to succeed in a regional role, it'll be critical that you have a deep understanding of these platforms, which one is good for what kind of audiences, what kind of products and services, right? It's a steep learning curve, but it's definitely an exciting one as well.
Now, one very interesting thing which I read about the Southeast Asian market was that there are some colors which are auspicious to them and some colors which are not. So, red can be auspicious to Indonesia, for example, and but it can be considered very unlucky in Singapore. So, do you adjust for these kind of nuances as well?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point that you bring up. And it is actually true. We need to be very cognizant of the nuances in each of these markets. And that's why, as a regional marketer, I feel it's very important to also have a team that's geographically diverse, right? So, people who are sitting in each of the markets, who understand the culture of that market, who know what the, do's and don'ts are. So we do definitely factor these kinds of things in, right? You need to be very culturally sensitive in markets like these, and take into consideration, what consumers expect, right, from a company that's doing business there. So I think definitely having local knowledge helps. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. In fact, my next question to you is about consumer behavior only. So, we are noticing that the world around us, businesses around us, are shook by what's going on in the world right now. And businesses are going on a rampant digital drive. And, this has to have an effect and translate to a change in consumer behavior as well. So, how do you think the markets have evolved, changed recently? How have interactions changed? If you could talk about that.
Yeah, so one of the things I'd say is that definitely we've seen a pickup in digital activity, right? People are spending more time at home inevitably, right? There's there are very limited amount of outdoor activities that are available. So we're definitely seeing a pickup in buying through digital channels as opposed to face-to-face channels. Now, in addition to that, I would say, like in general, right, one challenge for marketers in this era is how do we strike a balance between tailoring our messaging, right, to consumers in context of what is happening in the world, and at the same time not sounding like we're trying to be pushy or capitalizing on what's going on, right? So there's a very thin line between the two. Some companies have struggled in this space, whereas other companies have done extremely well, right? And the risk of going wrong here is very high, right? Because you lose a trust and confidence from your consumers. So it's very important to be genuine in the way you're messaging out to your consumers, and as a marketer, right, the way you speak to them. So, just to give an example, Autodesk has done some excellent work in this space. We've began to offer some free cloud solutions to customers during this period so that they can collaborate better in a remote environment. And that is really in the spirit of genuinely helping the customers out. So I think it's important to be genuine. It's important to understand, that consumers are also going to be sensitive to the messaging that you're going to send out and act accordingly.
Yeah, and I read something about this along the same lines, and I want to ask you about it. So basically, right now, consumers are not linear consumers anymore. I mean, the consumer behavior has become much complicated if we compare it to the traditional way of how they would react to things. So and it has become imperative for businesses to produce a lot of content, right? Because the media around us, social media and the online market space has become so content heavy, and everybody is generating content. So how do you make sure that that content is relevant, but then the amount is huge as well? So how do you like strike that balance and make sure that consumers get the right message?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a hot topic in organizations today, right? Any organization you go to, there'll be, an entire content marketing team that will be set up, who are trying to sort of figure out how much content to write, what content to write, how do we get the users to be engaged, right? So these are all very pertinent questions. And I think it's important to eventually link whatever content you're providing, right, to what your final objective is, right? I think it's important to look at it from a perspective of, okay, the content that I want to produce now is more from an educational standpoint. So we want to basically educate the customers about, let's say, cloud solutions or about software products. So that is our objective with this content, and then write content with that context. And then maybe couple of weeks or months down the line, you want to basically nurture those customers, right, into actual paying customers. So then you write an article that talks more specifically about your product and why the value is good. So I think you need to be very strategic about what is the objective of your content, focus on that at that point in time instead of trying to do too many things at the same time, and eventually think of it from a consumer standpoint, right? Because there's a lot of content out there. If you're going to be trying to be salesy in all of your content, people are not going to appreciate that, right? So they need to benefit from it as well. They need to get educated and learn from your content as well. So I think putting yourself in the shoes of the customer is one of the key things when it comes to content as well.
So, Vivek, as you said earlier as well, that the company should not come out as capitalists because the crisis is going to end one day and perceptions are going to be made. So, this is a sentiment which was there during the end of the Second World War as well, where a lot of companies were looked at as war profiteers. Now, now, when we look inside an organization, how does this sentiment transfer inside an organization, and how are work dynamics changing inside an organization during this as compared to what it was before the crisis?
Yeah, what I personally feel about this is that there's a lot lesser opportunity to interact with people outside of your immediate line of work, right? So you'll be on Zoom calls with your team members or your direct stakeholders, all day long. But we tend to lose touch with people who are outside of your immediate line of work, right? And then this could include senior leadership, people who are in, adjacent teams and so on, right? At the same time, having these relationships is extremely critical because sooner or later you will need support from them, right? It's important to be on top of mind, when it comes to these various stakeholders as well, right? So I think that's certainly one way in which dynamics have changed. There's no opportunity to have hallway conversations or to just do casual chit chat in the office, over a cup of tea or something. So I think one of the key things in order to sort of overcome this is having more one-on-ones with individuals, right? Compared to what you would have had regularly, right? So proactively set up sessions with people whom you don't have direct work with, but just in the spirit of building a rapport, having a relationship, so that when you need their support, they're there for you, right? It doesn't become all transactional. So I think that is something you've got to do. And personally, I've been setting up one-on-ones with a lot of people in adjacent teams, where we're not always talking about work. We could be talking about Netflix shows. We could be talking about a sports match, and all of that. And it's just in there with the intention of having a good relationship across a wider group of people in the organization. So I think that's a dynamic which everybody should be aware of, definitely.
since there are no non-verbal cues present anymore while interacting with somebody, so even now when we interact, there are not a lot of non-verbal cues which we can notice about each other. So do you think people overcompensate in certain places? Do you think there will be a lot of team emails or team WhatsApp messages, something like that?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, we started a sort of health competition recently, within our team, where we started keeping a track of points, when you do a certain activity, and the winner would get a amazing prize and all of that. So I think definitely teams are making an effort. I think it's definitely the responsibility of the leadership to keep engagement high, right, among the employees, and have a lot of these activities. I think what is also very important is to have a sense of humor, right, during this time, because otherwise calls become very transactional, right? You're jumping from one call to the other, and people are only talking about work. So I try sometimes to crack a few jokes while on calls. Some fail, some succeed, but I think it's important to have a sense of humor. I think it's key that you keep things light as far as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, all of us are trying to figure out a way to sort of traverse through this new normal that people are calling it now. But that's great advice. So, like I mentioned before, your career trajectory has been amazing and it's really, really inspiring for all of us. So, I want you to tell us some of the marketing battle scars that you may have picked up along the course of your career, right? And, it could be investments that you really believed in that did not generate the ROI that you were expecting. Anything that you can probably tell us.
So if I go back in time to my startup days, right, I can definitely think of a very good learning that I had during the time. So my startup was about training and education, right? So we were selling something that is intangible, and generally selling something that's intangible or service based is a bit more challenging. So we used to organize these free webinars for people to come and participate in, where we would give them a few nuggets of information, but at the same time introduce our course to them. So the response to those webinars were amazing. We would have 1,000 people register, maybe 500 show up, and we were related. We were like, this is exactly the kind of response that we wanted. Now we're going to have a lot of people buy our training courses. But reality hit us hard. We realized that while these people were attending our free webinars, their intention to actually pay money and buy was very little, and we didn't really get any paying customers from these people who were attending the webinars. And that's when we realized quality is so much more important than quantity, right? So we switched gears. We introduced a different program called Refer a Friend program, right? During the startup, where the past participants for different courses could refer the course to their friends and family, right? And people tend to associate a lot more credibility to what others say. Peer reviews make a huge difference, and that was the right tool for us. We got a lot of referrals, and we were able to sort of be successful in our marketing there. So I think the key lesson for us was, number one, quality is more important than quantity, and number two, you've got to use the right tool at the right time for the right product, right? Webinars are good in a certain context, but may not be good in a certain context. So you've got to think hard about that decision before actually arriving at that decision, and you've got to pilot it in a small way before you make big investments into doing something like that.
I think we should also explore some unconventional means of marketing as well. So these days, you see a lot of influencers marketing products for people. So something like stand-up comedians, Instagram influencers. These people will always be behind some product or the other, which was not prevalent 5 years ago, for example. Now, on that note, I want you to give us some actionable advice if somebody wants to pursue a career in marketing in today's landscape, because there used to be a very thick line between digital marketing and traditional marketing, but that line is eroding away as by the second. So, what kind of steps should a person take? Should a management student take if they want to pursue a career in marketing?
So, marketing itself is a very broad field, right? I wouldn't encourage anyone to think of marketing as sort of one career path they could take. It's, marketing has many spectrums within the umbrella of marketing, right? Which can be very different in nature. For example, brand marketing, market research, account-based marketing, or performance marketing are all very different in terms of the kind of skill set it needs to succeed, in terms of, how you might actually enjoy, right, each of these different disciplines. So I think it is critical that somebody who wants to foray into the world of marketing, they educate themselves thoroughly about all these forms of marketing. The best way to do that obviously is to speak to people in the industry, right, to get a clear sense of what each of these encompass, what kind of skill sets do you need, and then figure out what is it that goes with you, right? So just to give you an example of that, performance marketing is very data center, right? So somebody who's more analytical, somebody who's good with numbers, is likely to do better in performance marketing as opposed to brand marketing, which is a lot more about being creative and storytelling. So I think that is definitely the first step I would take if I'm thinking about a career in marketing. If you get an opportunity to do a more integrated role early on in your career, which is something like a full marketing manager or a head of marketing kind of a role, then you get a flavor of all these different disciplines, right? And then you can take a much better decision as to which ones you want to specialize in, right, as you progress into your career. So that could be another way to look at it. And that's why a lot of people recommend starting your career with a startup, maybe, because you become a jack of all, you understand all forms of marketing, and then you finally figure out what is it your real calling, right, based on your experience. So marketing is probably one of the most fastest moving disciplines out there today, right? Marketing today is completely different from what it was 10 years back. And marketing 10 years from now will be completely different from what it is today. There's so much technology, there's so much data and innovation that's going on, that one needs to really be on top of all of the different things to succeed in a career in marketing. I myself avidly read marketing journals on a daily basis just to understand, what are the different developments that are happening in the marketing world. So I think the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn, right, is very critical in the field of marketing, which has so much innovation going on. So that's another piece of advice I would definitely like to give to people who are looking into this career in marketing, to keep themselves aware of what's going on, what the different technologies are, what are the different companies that are proliferating in the space, right, to be knowledgeable.
No, I think that makes sense. And in fact, we were speaking to a data analytics expert in our last episode, and this is what he said as well, that you have to, your learning never stops. You have to keep reading. You have to keep updating yourself with the latest that's happening in the world, and that's true for marketing. That's true for data analytics. I think right now everything is changing because of digital transformation that's taking place. So we have to keep ourselves updated with what's happening. So thank you for that advice. Now we are nearing the end of this episode, and this is a question that we love to ask all our guests. And I know that you've spoken about some of the challenges that you faced in your career so far, but I want you to describe for us some of the hardest decisions that you have had to take through the course of your career.
Sure. So I think one of the harder decisions that I can think of, right, is when I was switching jobs. Very recently, I was, I made my move from American Express to Autodesk. And when the opportunity from Autodesk landed, right, I started asking myself a lot of questions, right? Because I had traditionally been a B2C marketer, right? Whereas, Autodesk being in the B2B space was very different. At the same time, I was wondering, should I specialize in BFSI? Because, there's a lot of digital opportunities in the BFSI space, right? If you talk about banking and financial services. But this was a software company. So it was switching industries, switching from B2C to B2B. So I had some concerns and, I wasn't sure what I should be doing. It was a really difficult decision. And I remember speaking to a couple of people in the industry during that time. And in particular, there's one conversation, right, that really changed my perspective on this. This individual was like, this is the time to explore, right? And go out, experience B2B marketing, right? See what marketing in a software company is like. It only helps you broaden your horizon. It only helps you get another perspective to it, right? And, being in a comfort zone is easy. I could have decided to stick to the industry, stick to B2C marketing, specialize in that. But I think, the journey has been so exciting. Since I joined Autodesk, I learned so much more about B2B marketing. I've gotten a flavor of what marketing in a software company is like. And I think I have a much more holistic knowledge of marketing in general, which is something that's going to last me a lifetime. So again, a piece of advice here would be, don't try to stick to your comfort zones, right? it's fine to try something new. Don't do something very arbeit. Of course, for example, if I was moving from marketing to operations overnight, that might have raised some questions. But within the world of marketing, experiencing B2C, B2B, different industries, I think that's something I would definitely encourage everyone to do.
Something which you rightly said, that we should not stick to our comfort zone, because as this landscape is evolving, your comfort zone is going to shrink by the second exponentially, and you'll be left with an inch to stand on if you just stick to your comfort zone. Now, since unfortunately we are at the end of our time, now we want you to have the space for 2 minutes and tell us something interesting which you are doing in the organization, or you are doing during this lockdown. What is going on, Vivek?
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought I should learn during this lockdown was a little bit about stock trading, right? We all heard about money to be made if you buy stocks and all of that. So when I got some free time, I decided to start this journey about learning more about stock trading and technical analysis, which is a way to predict stock prices. Now, coincidentally, the past generations of my family, right, everybody's been into the stock market, right? They've all had stock trading as a primary business. And my father is actually educated in this space. So during the lockdown, I got a chance to actually learn more about this business from him. And I realized it's really exciting, right? I want to say that, I can see why my family loved being in this line of business, because I decided to take a different career path. But, now I trade on the side. I think, it was a silver lining to the lockdown in that, I learned something new. So that was really good.
It's like you're going back to your undergrad where you majored in finance, and you're like, I have the time, so let me do that again.
Yeah, I mean, I think they say, right, you learn from your life backwards, but you live your life forward, right? So I think never say never. I think you've got to keep your mind open, right? I've even started thinking about maybe starting a company of my own in the future, right? Again, right? Because I feel like when I did my venture in the past, I didn't really have the experience. But now, having spent so much time in the industry, right, I could revisit that idea as well, right? So I think one's got to be open minded, one's got to keep pushing themselves to the limit, and a lot of new opportunities will emerge, I think, with that attitude.
It's like Steve Jobs said that you don't know how the dots are going to connect, but they are going to connect.
Exactly. That's the right way to look at it.
So with that is all the time we had, Vivek. We can't thank you enough for taking out the time and joining us from Singapore. We know you are very, very busy, and let's hope we can do this sometime again.